Alrighty. Do-do-do. Alright, so we are now here. Ooh, let me. Okay, so we are now here with the Necrolisk. Is the what? My computer's doing something. That shouldn't be an issue. Alright. So now we are back with the Warframe Art Book, and today we are going over the Necrolisk and, the Cambion Drift and the Intrati in general. I think it's all sort of folded into here. Maybe some stuff about Albrecht Intrati, so yeah. So the Necrolisk is also called a Void Research Enclave. It says that up here, on the title page. And this does appear in the game the first time you enter the Necrolisk. It might be hard to, or it might be easy to miss because it is like during the beginning parts of the Heart of Deimos quest. But as you enter the actual Necrolisk on the Cambion Drift, the title shows up. It says Necrolisk. It's got like a big rotating void symbol, I think, and it says Void Research Enclave. And so this tells us that the Necrolisk was, it's sort of in the title. It was established as a place for Albrecht to do void research, and that was continued by his family. They continue to do void research. These days they're... Oh, what is this? These days they're more concerned with their research regarding the infestation, but we do know that they do continue to work with and study the void, because during the Heart of Deimos quest, they seem to be on top of their... on top of things in terms of how they go about solving the problem. So we've got a great, nice landscape photo here of what looks like an early concept of the Necrolisk, because this is not really how it looks now. So you got the Cambion Drift, which is just this big infested landscape, and you've got sort of this hill, and it's got like the infested... giant infested tendrils snaking everywhere. And you've got this Orican building, and this is a lot more visible than what we see in-game. Of course, if you've been to the Necrolisk or been to the Cambion Drift, you know that the Necrolisk is basically completely encased in like a bubble or like a sack of infestation, and you can't really see any... It doesn't look like a structure, like a man-made structure, at least when you look at it. But on here, this earlier concept, you actually see this. Well, so this is actually what you see inside. So once you, I guess that they put like the bubble over this, because once you go in the bubble, this is actually what you see. You've got this platform with steps leading up to it, and then like a big, like a tall door. So this is actually, this might be what the Necrolisk is supposed to look like before it got sort of covered. This is still all very covered in infestation. Infested tendrils sounds like a good time to me. Well, and then of course in the background you see Mars. Of course the Necrolisk is on Deimos, which is a moon of Mars, And so Mars is going to be generally visible in the skybox of Deimos. And realistically, the opposite shouldn't be true. You can, I think, if you're on Mars, look up and see like a big asteroid, which I suppose is supposed to be Phobos. But Phobos and Deimos, which are the two moons of Mars, are so small and so far away you really can't see them. At least not like we can see our moon. But, you know, Deimos, my beloved, indeed. I find Deimos fascinating for... Like, I don't typically find the infestation fascinating. And I guess they didn't really do too much to help with that. But the fact that it's like this Orican family really did intrigue me. I remember when they announced that they were going to do an infested open world, I was like, meh. And then they showed it off at TennoCon, I was like, okay, I can get more interested in this. And then, you know, now the whole current story arc is sort of based around this. I think it's easy to forget because you... for me, at least, these days, I don't go up into the top part of the Necrolisk anymore. But I am, you know, going to the Necrolisk multiple times a day, or week, you know, to do Netracell, ZDA, whatever. Mars moons are always fucked up in every sci-fi setting. Yeah, I feel like a lot of times they don't even mention them. Because, they're not always... I mean, they're not super well known, I think. I know in The Expanse, one of them gets blown up. Which I guess is a minor spoiler. So this chapter, as always, has a foreword by... this one's by Rosa Lee, the Associate Art Director at the time. Heart of Deimos was one of the projects I enjoyed concepting and exploring because of its unique combination of infested and dark Orican ancestors, the Entrati. I wanted to put myself in the shoes of the mad scientists scribbling equations and unknown ancient languages on the walls as they were opening the Void Portal. I imagined the Void compasses as an altar that the scientists worship as a navigational tool, and the heart machine as a literal heart made from 10,000 brass pieces that pump energy to open the portal. These weren't your ordinary mad scientists. As a finishing touch, I gave the Entrati a cult-like feel with the dark gothic chapel mood and uneasy ritual-like setups. That's very cool. This is... I think we'll talk about it when we get there. Let me just flip forward and sort of see... this is... yeah, I think when we get to the heart, I'll talk a little bit about the heart and like my understanding of it. I'm just making sure that it actually shows up here. It's gotta show up here, right? If not, I'll just circle back to it. But yeah, so it's interesting that she, Rosa, viewed the sort of the science as that was happening, the void science, as a religion, which is cool. I think a lot of that does translate. I think they did a good job with that. And then the interesting note is that the heart is supposed to pump energy to open the portal. And like I said, I'll get more into detail, but that is roughly how I envision the Heart of Deimos functioning as well. So that's good. Cult-like feel when the Entrati are honestly the least cult-like of the Orican. It's true, but I think the cult of the Orican that is like the general cult of the Orican is actually something that we got like used to, you know, because in a sense you see it every time you go onto Lua or go into like the Void Towers. It's all, I mean, a lot of their religion and culture is sort of baked into the architecture even. And I think we got sort of used to it. And it is very bright and open. And so the Entrati as people and as a group, you're right, are less cult-like than the rest of them. And like less religious, I would say, probably. But it's interesting that the aesthetic is almost the opposite. It is really cool. And I do think that when it comes to Albrecht specifically, who is like the originator of all the Entrati stuff, his obsession and his fervor does seem religious to me. Not actually religious, just like as a metaphor, which I think is also pretty cool. Alright, so right off the bat, we've got like an absolutely massive creature. This is wild. So this is a person, by the way. This is a person for scale running away, arms up in the air. And then you've got this giant, six-legged, this is a head, I guess. So you've got this six-legged creature that is 100 or 200 feet tall. Like, this thing is huge. And then the part that's detailed, it's kind of sketched out, and then the part that's detailed is like this this front right arm, like in the foreground, and it's like possibly reaching out maybe for this guy, although he seems like an ant, compared to this thing. It looks like the back four legs are for walking, and the front two are for reaching, like a centaur, and then the head is mounted on like a seventh kind of arm, or like a stalk or a tentacle, and it looks like it's either just a giant light shining down, or it might be like a big sucking maw, but it doesn't really have a face. So this is just a giant, terrifying creature. I think maybe the mouth might be in the arm, actually, because there's a small hole, small in comparison to the rest of the arm. There's a small hole or cavity in the middle of the hand. So maybe that's its mouth, and this is a giant eye/light. Kind of like an anglerfish, because they have the light on a stalk. But yeah, this thing is just weird and creepy. Albert does describe himself in religious metaphors in his notes. That's true. Yeah, no, I don't think we'll see how much it comes up, but if it doesn't, I am happy to rant at length about how much I love sort of Albert Entrati and the way they introduced him and the way they handle him. Just really great, and my favorite character in the games so far. I feel like it's gonna start whispering to me in iambic heptameter. You mean this thing? Yeah, I mean, this thing is just weird and creepy and scary. But it's also, it's interesting that this isn't actually something that we see. It's an interesting concept, and I guess it looks a little similar to some of the beasts that we see on Deimos. I would say maybe the Undazoa, based on the leg shape. Except the Undazoa are extremely different to this. But, and they're much, much smaller. Big hug from Argentina. Well, big hug back. I'm happy to share this. There's a lot to look at and to examine. So happy to share it, and thanks for tuning in. Alright, so on this page, we've got a few things. So I like this. These all have sketches of a person and how these beasts. So it looks like all of these things are supposed to prey on people or other animals. These are lots of predatory organisms, and I actually feel like we don't really see a lot of that because Deimos has the infested creatures, which we're all used to at this point. When we see them on Deimos, we're like, okay, yeah, big whoop. Chargers and runners and leapers, and even the new ones they added the Therids, the one that flings spiderwebs at you. You're just like, oh, that's just another ancient. That's how I see them. And then the ones that are truly unique are the tendril monsters. Hi, Caroline. And that's actually, I think, the first one of these is describing the tendril monsters or a version of them. And those ones are, I mean, as a gameplay thing, they're just really annoying. but they do give you the sense of like, oh, there's things hanging about and they're gonna attack you. But it looks like they concepted a ton of different things that were like gonna attack you, which is a cool, I don't think you can really make a Tenno feel scared, but it would have been cool. They also have some of the best infested designs. I do think the designs are really good. I guess it's just like it is earlier in the star chart, but of course, as an older player, when I first encountered Deimos, it wasn't much of a threat, and so I don't get to appreciate a lot of the designs as much as maybe a newer player would, because you just don't experience them when you're obliterating them with, Kufa Ogres or whatever. I wonder if there's concept art of the scrapped Cambion Drift boss in this book. I mean, maybe that's what... This thing is huge. This is like maybe the size of the worms. Maybe this was supposed to be the boss. I don't know. Yeah, thank you for sharing the book. Yeah, happy to show it off because, this is still a lore-focused channel and there's lots of interesting lore in here. Alright, so, with that discussion, we've got this thing, which is like a hanging thing. This looks like it's supposed to hang, from the ceiling of perhaps a cave, and it's got these, like, tendrils or tentacles, like, in loops. And you've got a guy walking by, he's whistling. They're all of these storyboard kind of things. The guy's like starts off, whistling, wandering by. He walks by the thing and it. Oh geez. And the loops detach and like go for the limbs, and then I guess it's not hanging. I don't know. It might not be hanging. I thought that this was hanging, but it's actually like a point. Like it's a barbed, like a thorn, or a stinger. And so the loops sort of grab onto the limbs, and the barb stabs you in the chest. It's there's arrows indicating the movement, and it says puncture, rinse and repeat. So it like grabs you by all the limbs, and then the part in the middle like just stabs you in the chest over and over again. And possibly inject something. It doesn't mention that. It might just kill you. Being a new player and seeing a Jugulus rise out of the ground definitely had an impact. Okay, yeah, the Jugulus, I would say those are really cool for the first time you see them. And they're fairly unique, I would say. Those are really cool. But I think that they often don't have too much of an impact on gameplay. But as a design, they're really amazing. Dr. Andrade gives me Kang the Conqueror vibes. Yeah. Time-traveling mad scientist. Yeah. So this next... Oh, jeez. This is terrible. So this next design is... So they have, like, a detailed model, and then they have, like, the sort of comic book storyboard of how it works. So it's like a flat thing with like way too many legs, like more legs than a centipede has, like millipede level legs. But it's like a big flat. It's sort of like a bony. It looks like a hard exterior, and it looks like you'd have multiple of them. They'd be about the size of like. They look like a foot or two in diameter, just like plates basically, and they just hang out flat on the ground, and in a bunch of them, and then someone walks on top of them, and they like stand up, and they're not very tall, but they just stand up, and they skitter, and the person on top is like carried along basically, because they're standing on top of them, and there's like a whole bunch of them, and they skitter along, and they throw him in like a pit, which is like a monster. There's like teeth at the bottom and like an eye. So they throw him in a pit, which like is a monster, and then they all hop in after him to like help eat him and digest him. It's terrible, terrifying. I hate this. I guess there's no real way to implement this gameplay wise, right? Like it's anyway. But it is a terrifying and really interesting concept. I could see this in like I could see this like on TV. I don't know if any of you watched Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, which is a show on Apple TV about it's like set in like the new sort of King Kong Godzilla cinematic universe. And so they're dealing with like giant monsters, and there's like a scene in the pilot episode where there's like a bunch of like baby insect. They're like larvae of like one of the giant monsters, and so they're like wolf-sized, and there's like hundreds of them. Then they're like bugs. It started giving me those kind of vibes, and I could see this type of thing in that show. You get to Deimos in a single 3-hour play session as a brand new player. I mean, yeah. So yeah, the Cambion Drift is scary when you still only have the default starting weapons. 3 hours, though, I think you'd have to be, like... I mean, I don't know if you're sort of exaggerating. I think 3 hours, you'd have to be, like, exaggerated and have to have someone helping you out. I could definitely see in the first few days. For sure. But these days, size vigil is mandatory. Well... but, like, Fortuna... you know... I think these things are more mandatory, if I'm recalling correctly. That they've sort of made these part of the main progression. So I think it's a little bit longer to get to Deimos. But yeah, no, I mean for sure, you'd still probably be on your same. Especially as a new player, you wouldn't know to swap out weapons or to like upgrade them or anything like that. Deimos gives me major vibes of Catachan mixed with the Tyranids. Yes, Tyranids is also sort of what I'm thinking of here. And there's, of course, a lot of overlap on the lore there. So yeah, you've got basically like bugs that carry you away into a pit. This one is really weird. This one is actually, so this one's also about like knee height, kind of. And it's like a rolling thing. It's like a bony sort of wheel, and then there's stuff sticking out at the end on like the axles. So it's sort of like wide or long, but it's just like it's like a cylinder basically, and it's got like a center like wheel, and it turns. But and the things that are sticking out are sort of like tentacles that like press together, and I think there might be teeth on the inside of them. But the thing that interests me about this is this actually, obviously, you know, Deimos, and I'm assuming that all of this is relatively recent designs, like, for Deimos. Like, I am going to assume that these aren't, like, 10-year-old infested designs for the most part, unless we see something that looks similar to stuff we've seen earlier. But I think that they're like, oh, let's do Deimos, let's do an infested world, okay, let's come up with a bunch of new infested designs for it. That's what I'm picturing these designs for. So most of these things that we're going to see are like newer than some of the older stuff that we've seen in this book. And that is all like a sort of a prologue of me saying that like this actually reminds me of one of the things we saw a long time ago in this book from the Grenier section, when it comes to the rollers, because the rollers, there was like a note about this in this section that I commented at the time. Okay, it's like at the very start. So you have the rollers here. And it actually says here in the sketch note, if it rolls on a consistent axis, overall shape could be more interesting. And then it shows the rollers, as you know, are just spheres. But because they roll on a consistent axis, they're like, hey, if it doesn't roll in every direction and it just rolls in one direction, then you got stuff sticking out the side. And there's like spikes and like random stuff sticking out the side. Because it's not... I mean, you get the sense that it could, because the way they are in game is like as a sphere, so you get the sense that it could roll in any direction it wanted, but if they're like... if it just rolls in one direction and it could like sort of turn and steer, but it is rolling generally on one axis. You can have stuff sticking out on the axle, basically, and they won't impede its movement. And that's and I was like, oh, that is interesting. When I saw that, however many weeks ago was the Grenier section. And this is the exact same thing. This is like a single thing in the middle that's rolling, and then you've got stuff sticking out along the axis. And that's very cool. And so in the sketch, it's just funny how it's like a callback for something like 10 years ago. And so in the sketch here, you've got a guy walking along, he's like whistling doo-doo-doo, and then this thing rolls up from behind and like basically hits him on the ankle or like the foot and maybe the back of the knee. And it hits him and like trips him up, and then once he's like stopped moving and it sort of got him, then the tentacles or tendrils at the end sort of grab onto his foot. It doesn't look like this thing is capable of like actually eating him. It looks more like an immobilizing kind of thing, because it's not big enough, unless it like fully digests your leg and like moves up your body. It doesn't look like it could do that though. But it like rolls and it hits you, and it sort of like, it hits your leg and makes you go down, and then it like latches on and like grabs and like maybe starts trying to eat you. But yeah, I mean, like once you're in that position, you're definitely a lot easier for something else to come along and try to eat you. I got to Deimos in 3 hours playing solo when I started a few weeks ago. I got to the second dream by day 3. Wow. You started playing it 3 weeks ago? That is, I mean, that's fairly dedicated, I would say. I think it's easier. They've changed it. They're continuing to work on the new player experience, but just the few times that I've like gone back and revisited the new player experience, it's like you can easily get sidetracked. So the fact that you're like going straight for Deimos, going straight for the second dream, is impressive, and yeah. Deimos used to be a sun. Deimos is a moon of Jupiter. Sorry, I don't know why I said Jupiter. Mars. It orbits Mars. So it's a moon of Mars. All right. So the next creature is an Undazoa. I mean, this pretty clearly became, turned into the Undazoa. Looks to be roughly the same size too, as it is in game. So in this one, the guy's not whistling. He's actually he's saying "Here, kitty, kitty," and he's actually like calling out to it. And it's walking towards him, and it like tackles him. It what does it say? Knock. So it knocks it like. Because it's like low to the ground, so it runs at him, hits him in like the legs, knocks him down, and then with its legs, it like holds down all 4 of the guy's like limbs, and then because the mouth is in the middle, the mouth is right here, and it's closed, so you can't really see it, and then in the diagram, it's like opening out, so it can like, and it's like eating his like abdomen. And that is, I mean, Undazoas still have that anatomy, like they still have like a mouth in the middle of them, but the way that they're treated in the game now is not really as predators, really. They're just sort of, they're weird, because they're described as like extremely simple, and they like basically eat secretions and stuff like that, and like goo. So the design here is that they would like hold you down and eat you from like the middle, and they don't really do that in lore, but it is interesting. They would be weird, and they have abilities like the gaseous, they release like noxious fumes, and they like make these noises that are supposed to summon other infested. I don't know if they actually do that. But yeah, that's a mood though. I love doing the conservation stuff. I know. Yeah, I did. I have write-ups, like lore write-ups on the animals and stuff, of all three of the big open worlds, and so I spent like a lot of time, following around the Undazoa and like I'm like tracking them for conservation and stuff. I think Deimos has maybe the most interesting conservation, and it has I think the most. It might be tied with Fortuna for like having the most variety of animals. It does beat it in terms of like variety of like conceptual designs, because some of the stuff on the Orb Valis is like overlapping with itself, really. But the designs of the animals on Deimos are like very wacky, very crazy. And very interesting, especially if you dive into like the lore of like how predicites work and stuff like that. Humans, when they see a dangerous wild animal, I mean, yeah, no, I if I ever saw like a bear in real life, I'm like, this thing is vicious. But I've seen so many videos of like Russians, like hanging out with a bear and like petting it. I'm like, but I could pet it, right? It's just a giant floof. I don't know if I would feel the same way about like a Deimos animal, but I definitely get the instinct of this guy being like, "Hey, kitty, kitty." It's always so fun when concept art has concepts for how the enemy would act. I know, that's why I'm like, that's why I'm so excited for this book. I'm glad that it has this kind of stuff, because I like seeing what the original intent is when they create and when they design these things. Because we do see, this other stuff is more. Doesn't really make it into the game. This like weird insect thing and the rolling thing, those just didn't make it into the game, and maybe they will at some point. But the Undazoa, we do see them in the game, and this is not at all how they act. And so if you're looking at them, you're like, oh, this is like a really weird design. Why do they have a mouth in the middle of them? Like, and it's because they were designed for something completely different. And so I really love, being able to dive into that. And so the last one... Whoa. The last one is... Yikes. It looks like it's just a mouth. It looks like kind of like a tendril drone. It looks like the tendril drones that we see on Deimos are like a mix between this first one and this last one. Because this one is a thing that sort of like, I guess, flies through the air a little bit. I don't see how it flies. Although, in that same... line of questioning, I don't know how the Deimos tendril drones fly either. They just sort of float in the air for no reason. But yeah, so this one just sort of hangs out in the air, in the sky, and this actually says invisible-ish. I don't know why it says ish, but like apparently it's invisible. It hangs out, and then a guy comes by, so maybe it is like hanging from a ceiling, and they just don't show that. Because I don't see why it would need to be invisible if it can fly. But it's hanging out, invisible-ish. A guy walks near it, and it, like, basically eats his head. Because it's just like a mouth with, like, claws on the end. That's basically all it is. And so it, like, latches onto his face, and here he's saying, it says chomp, 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 and he's saying, my hair. But yeah, so it looks like the tendril drones, because this is like just a giant mouth, and then here, this one is mostly just tendrils and tentacles, and it like grabs onto you and stabs you, and so eventually that turns into the thing where it grabs onto your face, and then like latches onto your face, like this one is latching. So, I don't know. In my experience, if you are calm enough and lucky enough, you can pet a black bear. In your experience, have you pet a black bear, like a wild one? I know, like, I've been, camping a lot and throughout, like, black bear territory, and it changes, like, how you have to camp and, like, set up and stuff like that. I don't think I've only seen one once or twice. But And I know that they're like not generally going to be super aggressive. It's like the thing of like they're more scared of you. Like black bears, not other types of bears are more aggressive. But at the same time, I have never gotten close enough to one to pet it, and I still don't know that I would, even though I know that they're not as hostile as some other ones. If you're saying that you've pet a black bear, that is crazy. And you're braver than I am. So here we've got some, Keith Thompson style sketches. This first one, I don't know what it is. It looks like an infested like bird thing. Maybe this is what a Avacea is supposed to look like. I don't really know what an Avacea looks like because, they're far away, they're flying, you trank them, and I guess you kind of get a good look at them when you're like in the reward screen for them, but I just guess I didn't pay much attention to them. I had a pet wild bear when I was 10. That is crazy. And lucky. I mean, that that sounds like a very unique experience. So this might be an Avacea. It's perched on like, it looks like a fist. It looks like it's like an arm reaching out, and then it's just like a fist. I don't know if that's what it's supposed to be. But yeah, I mean, this looks like a bird, but it's like all skeletal and like patchy and like bony, and it's full of eyes or like eggs or something like that. It's just like full of them, and because it's got all these like holes in it, you can see them. But yeah, this thing is weird and creepy. And maybe it's an Avacea, and if it's not, then it's something that I guess didn't really show up. Maybe it's like an osprey, like a super, super, super infested osprey. But, like, I don't think so. It looks different. Here we've got a, what are these called? Carnus? Like the centipede dude. Looks like a slightly earlier version. This one almost looks like it has like a face, like a droopy face. And like kind of like arm legs, by its head. But yeah, the centipede guy, bitey scratchykins, as Otak calls them. They are called Carnuses, right? I think that's what they are. And here you've got a necromech, obviously not infested, but it's still on the page, with a cortege, I think is what it's got. I think it's got the like the shotgun weapon. Bone Widow, of course, that was the first one that they had. Jugulus here, the saxum, also called the femur, I think. I think in game, because in concept art they were just called femurs, and in the game they're called saxums, and I think the shoulder things are still called femurs when you like aim at them. And like, yeah, you gotta like shoot them, or you can to like do additional damage. Or something like that. And then you have the mitocids, the ones that split into two when you shoot them at the waist, or I think just when they hit 50% damage, then they split into two. The splitting infested are really annoying for no reason. I think the most annoying thing is because I think when they do the split, they're like briefly invincible. And that's the part I feel is like the most annoying, because I'm like, oh, now I have to wait for you to actually be able to be damaged again. But they are like also very fast and nimble, which is annoying for other reasons because of my terrible aim. But usually, if I'm like fighting a bunch of infested, I'm like in a necromech and just like blasting them away with AoE effects. So like I don't pay too much attention to them. And then when they split, then I'm like, okay, well now it's annoying because I'm just continuously firing, and I have to. But it does nothing for like a second or two. Necromech's my beloved. So on this page, we've got, I've seen these before. This one is by Roger Adams, and I'm assuming this one is going to be too. But these are like the older concepts for the Entrati, and they were always supposed to be big, like really big. And that was implied to be because of the infestation, I believe, in like the art conversations in the art panel and dev streams that I remember off the top of my head. And then we later got confirmation in lore from Albrecht's Grimoire notes that is in fact the case, that the gray strain of the infestation makes things really big for some reason. And so that was eventually worked into the game as well. But yeah, so they're partially infested Orokin, so they've got the blue skin, but they're also big. And the Orokin were, of course, bigger than people, than humans, normal humans. But these are, Titanic. So you got Excalibur for scale, and then this thing is, 7 times taller than he is. So it's, obviously huge. And it's, partially infested. It's, either got multiple arms, or it's just, these are just sort of, tendrils tying it into the wall or something like that. And then here's another one. This one is fused into the wall. This one is reminding me of in Pirates of the Caribbean, where the Davy Jones's crew are half fish and stuff like that, and then the ones that have been there for super long just start fusing into the ship, and becoming part of the ship, and that's what this one reminds me of. He's fusing into the wall and becoming just truly one with the infestation. And then you get the long Orokin arm, which has been twisted and been infested, so the fingers are crazy long on this, which is just an additional level of creepy. Yeah. But yeah, this foot is still intact, even though the whole leg is infested, and the other foot is not. It's just true. It's also purely infested, but it didn't get down to the foot. You've got all the 5 toes here. I think if this one's wearing clothes, and the clothes are also infested. It's really just the whole thing. Alright, so here we've got... Oh. Huh. That's weird. So here we've got some more fish and wildlife. I definitely do not remember the names of the fish. But so one of the interesting things are, because again, I did a write-up on resources, and I have for each of the planets in terms of lore, because you do get some interesting little tidbits. I would say especially in Fortuna, on the Ordvalis, you get good descriptions of what the servofish are doing and why. And so I also did that with the Ordvalis with the Cambion Drift, which I think is a little bit less useful. But it has descriptions of the fish. And so I was this is that you've got the original Orokin things, whatever they were, Orokin construction fish, and then you've got partially infested versions of them, and then you've got completely wholly infested versions of them. And so you actually get 3 different versions of, and you compare them, and you're this was the same fish, actually. And there's even some things where you're this might be an infested version of actually an Orvalis servofish, and that is harder to tie together. I think it's a little less clear. But I've seen people sort of make that connection. But it's interesting. And so this is cool. And I think, yeah. So I think let me try to pull it up so I can do. If my internet will cooperate. Miscellaneous item descriptions. Demos resources. This is taking a while to load. It might be like screwing up the stream because it's taking so long to load. I hope that's not the case. Alright. So, oh, this is not going to be super useful actually. Alright, this isn't as useful as I thought it was going to be. But I think, like, so, like I said, you've got, if you look at all the fish on Deimos, you see, like, 3 different versions of the same thing. The original Orkin fish, the partially infested fish, and then the completely infested fish. And some of them are not complete, like, the sequences are complete. So you get some infested things, and you don't know what the, like, where the original Orkin thing is. And some people are like, oh, it's actually something on Deimos. Or on the Orbelas. And so I think this is a good example, but I'm going off the top of my head, so I could be wrong. But so here we've got, these look like original infested fish. Like they're not based on anything, they're just infested fish. But here, on these 4 panels, you have original Orkin fish here, and then the infested versions. And original Orkin fish here, and then the infested versions. And I think these ones we actually don't see, because there's only 3, I think, actual Orkin fish that you see on the Cambion Drift, and so these ones you actually don't see. I could be wrong on like specifics, but I think like this one you don't see. Like you see, I recognize this infested fish. This is I think a chimera. I think this is an amniophysi. And you don't see the counterparts that they evolved from, and we see the concept art of them here, and I don't think these are actually in the game. But it's cool that they've concepted them out. These ones aren't matched with. This is I recognize this one. I think it starts, like, I think this is a Glutinox, maybe? Or I could be wrong. This one is, like, the one that shows up all the time, though. I think these other ones, I recognize this one up here. Well, these first 3 are actually just these 3. But I think some of these other ones are just concepted and they didn't make it into the game. But yeah, I should have like pulled this up in a better fashion, and I've seen Reddit posts that break this down as well, in a better way than I did. But yeah, it's just interesting to be like, here's the Orkin fish, and then over millennia or centuries, then you get the infested versions of those fish, and then in like a rare case, you might end up finding an uninfested original Orkin fish. This is just an access console that gets infested. You see these like in the isolation vaults for certain bounties and stuff like that. Here we've got more fish. You've got sort of in the background. There's like the these 2 are the same fish, and in the background of each of these images, you have the original Orkin fish, and then this is a partially infested version. You see, you still got some of the golden bits, but it's also kind of infested, and this is the wholly infested version. And the background of each is like the original Orkin one, but this one there's no gold bits left. And then up here we've got a concept image of a predacite. I've seen this before actually. and this art is by Marco Hasman. But the version of this I've seen actually has a bunch of annotations, and I'm surprised and disappointed that these are actually taken off in this. It had a bunch of annotations about, like, bony hide and stuff like that. And one of the important things, this is like, the whole reason I got the book is because I wanted to see the types of, like, notes and stuff that they left behind on the concept art. And I'm like I said, I'm disappointed that they provided a version that doesn't have that. Because I have seen the one with, like, the notes, and the most interesting thing that I can remember is that these structures, the ear-like structures on the side of the face, are actually air filters. They filter in the air, and so they possibly act as, like, gills or lungs, or something, and that's it. Like, that's how it breathes out of the side of its face instead of, like, through its... I guess it doesn't really have a nose. But yeah. So, but yeah, the interesting thing here is that these ears are actually not ears. They're, I guess, sort of like, they're for breathing, and they filter the air that it breathes, which is very interesting. And doesn't show up in game, but is, like I said, in the concept art. The other cool thing about Predasites, and, as you encounter them in game, they're sort of just like, they're essentially infested Kubros. That's how the game treats them. And so they're just like beasts. But the thing that is cool about them, if you, like, are reading into the description and reading up about the lore about them, is that they are full of parasites. Like, they carry around, like, a cloud of, like, different types of parasites inside them. And they can, like, spit them out as like, an attack. And they do various things. There's the various breeds of Predasites, and so the parasites that they have do different things. But they've just got, like, a bunch of, like... I guess they're more of, like, symbiotes than actual parasites, because they don't seem to be hurting the Predasite. They are just there to hurt other things. But that's, like, the thematic thing that I think is cool about Predasites, is that they're actually, like, almost like mini swarms. So here you've got some Necromech sigils. You can buy, like, a version of this. I don't think any of these, but it's, like, similar to the one in the middle, I think. You can buy it at Lloyd's shop. And then here we've got, like, the different versions of the Entrati caskets, and then how those eventually turn into cysts. I think this one is, like, the one that's closest to what's in the game. And then these other versions I don't think we see. But yeah, like, these are, like, Entrati loot boxes, and then they eventually turn into, like, infested loot boxes, which is interesting. And then here you've got one of the giant void mirror thingies that show up in the isolation vaults, which I always thought were really cool. This was the first way to see aura worms, by the way, in the game. They were teased in a couple of places, but this is the first place where you could actually see them in the game. Is every now and then they'd be, like, in... Because it's like a giant piece of, like, glass or something. I call them void mirrors because when you look into them, they actually show you, like, the void. They're like windows almost into the void, even though they're not portals because you can't go through the portal. They just sort of show you the void. And every now and then, and this I believe is still true, it's not that I've tested this, I believe it's still true that you can, if you, like, watch the void for long enough, which is hard because this one spins around, so you have to, like, keep moving to keep up with it. But if you watch it for long enough, you'll see an aura worm just, like, flying through the void. And that was the first time you actually can see the aura worms in the game. And so there's some notes here. Extendable pieces, separate pieces to accommodate different ratios. So the golden, like, the frame of the shard, they apparently, it's, like, sort of modular, so that it can accommodate different sizes and different shapes. Because there are different... This is, I think, one of the more common versions, but there's like different versions of these void mirrors you can encounter in the labs. And so the notation just indicates that they basically use the same pieces for the outer frame, and they can just move them and change them to accommodate different sizes and shapes of the void mirror. So not super interesting in terms of notation. Here you've got different concepts for the velocipedes, the flying bugs. The last one looks like the one that they settled on for the game. But there's... I mean... Well, it's interesting because this one is more dragonfly-like. This one has got like legs in the back of it, which is weird. This one doesn't appear to have wings at all, so I don't know what the deal is there. This one also like looks more like a glider or like a skimmer of some kind. Interesting. I would have thought that they would have been like dragonflies from the start. Yeah. And then these three pictures are just infested stuff. I say this a lot, but like sometimes it's hard to know what you're looking at, and you're just like, "Yep, that's infested." I said this with the sentience too, but this one looks like it's like translucent sacs or globes or maybe fans. Like I think they're spheres. But they're like translucent spheres growing on an infested bush or something. It doesn't look like there's anything in them. Like, they're not egg sacs or anything. Ooh. Well, that's interesting. Whoa. Alright. So, now we're looking into some of the more Entrati-looking stuff. This looks like it maybe is... no, I think this is just one of the isolation vault tiles. This is the big thing that's in the middle of, the loading screen, the part that you have to pass through to get from the Necrolisk to the Cambion Drift or vice versa. You, go into the big chamber, and it, loads as you walk across it. There's this thing in the middle of it. It's just like a big sphere. I think it just might be like a Lucent Terra Globe. Lucent Terra Globes are like a resource, and the ones that you gather for resources are very small, but they look identical to, they've got these spheres everywhere. They're just white spheres with white lines, glowing lines carved into them. And my assumption is that these are just different sizes of Lucent Terra Globe. And so if that's the case and they're all identical based on other than size, then this is just a giant Lucent Terra Globe in some sort of apparatus in the middle of the chamber. You've got some walls here, and I do love the whole Entrati architecture aesthetic vibe. And then here you've got the heart and the wall. So it's in front of a giant wall of stone, and there's a trapezoidal pyramid, portal, like a door, basically on the wall. And then the heart hangs just directly in front of it. So, and then there's a Excalibur for scale down here. So, how exactly the heart works is not really explained. What is said, I'm gonna try to pull it up, but if it takes too long to load, who knows? Okay, that was quick. Scroll down to just confirming. Not much is said about it in the quest, and then nothing is said about it after. So that's it. What it says is, Mother Entrati says it pumps the arteries of the here and the void. And then later in the quest, Necroloid mentions that if the heart fails, all the void technology, and he specifically says Warframes, Tenno, and the solar rails, they will stop functioning. Let me double check that. The solar rails, the Tenno, we all depend on the heart to keep the wall open to the other side. If the heart stops, everything goes with it. So those are really the only two dialogue lines that have to do with the heart and how it works. And so everything else, I guess we sort of have to infer. I guess we're not going to find out more about the Cerebrum Magnum here. I would like to know more about that. I haven't seen anything about that yet. Does the Cerebrum Magnum on the last page? Oh, okay. Yeah, well, like I said, it was sort of hard for me to figure out what this was, but I do think this does look like the, just to interrupt my little heart thing for a minute, it does actually look like the Cerebrum Magna. So the Cerebrum Magna, for anyone who doesn't know, is this large structure out on the Cambion Drift. I think it's in like the southeast corner of the map, maybe. But it's labeled on the map when you get there. But it's just like this big thing, and it looks like this, not in terms of color. The colors are a bit different. But it's just like this large structure. And, of course, Cerebrum Magnum just means large brain. And if you go into it, there's like... Oh man, it's been a while. If you go, you can go into it a little bit, and there's like a pit, and it's like full of like energy. And I think if you go into it, it's just a teleport volume, and it like you respawn. It doesn't kill you; it just respawns you, like you fell off the edge of the map. If I'm remembering right. But and it's so detailed, and it's got like it looks like DE had some plans for it, and maybe it's like it looks like it's basically an Infesta thing, but you could be like, oh, maybe it was originally an Entrati thing, like, well, because the Entrati built like the heart, which is a giant heart, and then you have this thing that's just called Big Brain, and you're like, maybe this is also a different Entrati thing, or maybe it's just some nexus of like nerve synapses for the infested. It would have been... I agree with Cyrus that it would have been interesting to get some more information on that, and I had completely forgotten about it up until now, and I don't think we will be getting too much exposition on that, unfortunately. It would have been nice to know more about the Cerebrum Magna. But it doesn't look like there's any like notes or anything that talk about it, which is a shame. I would love to know. It's one of those things where you're like, okay, DE had a plan for this and they just didn't finish it, and we don't know what it is because they didn't ever talk about it. Oh man, I completely forgot about the Cerebrum until now. So anyway, going back to the heart, I guess I should have finished this thought first. My guess as to how the heart works and how it ties into like I guess the physics of Warframe is that this door, which I'm also assuming is what is referred to as the Wall of Loke, is like the portal between the void and real space. Like there's obviously tons of portals, but in different Orokin technology. And we've seen many different portals, but my theory is that this is like the one portal that enables all of them to function. And so all of the void energy that's present in, or at least most of the void energy that is present in like the origin system, actually flows through this door. And so this door needs to be open. And as long as it's open, energy can come from the void, which just has infinite or near infinite energy just floating around, and it's capable of all this interesting stuff because it doesn't obey the laws of physics. But it flows through the door, and and enters real space, and then it spreads out from Deimos all across the system, and from there it can be harnessed by other organ technology, and so the solar rails, any other portals that we see, those are made possible by the void energy that is coming through this door. And, the Warframes, which are void empowered, that energy also comes from the door. They, pick it up from... the void energy goes through the door, enters real space, and sort of just becomes ambient. But if the door ever closes, then that energy wouldn't be there. There's a few issues with this theory, but I don't think I've heard yet a theory that there weren't issues with in terms of the heart. So that is... And so what the heart does, its function is to keep this door open always. This door always has to be open. This trapezoidal portal, it always has to be open in order for energy to enter, for the void energy to be present in the origin system. And if the door ever shuts, then you basically instantly cuts off the void energy, and anything that relied on that void energy to operate no longer does operate. And so that's why the heart is just a giant biomechanical structure to provide power to keep this portal open. And then during the quest, the Heart of Deimos, of course, the heart is sabotaged and it stops working, and the portal closes, and we're told that the solar rails would stop working. We don't really see confirmation of that, but I guess we can assume that happened. And our Warframe stops working. Hey, Danny. Hey. So we know that during the quest, the Warframe that you're using stops working. It basically can only walk. And it, loses all of its abilities and even its, parkour moves. And so... And that happens, basically instantly once the heart... once the portal closes. And so that, based on like I said, the dialogue that we have, that is what leads me to my sort of theory that you basically have a canonical door, the Wall of Loke, that all void energy must pass through in order to be present in the origin system and available for work. And the door basically has to always be kept open, and that's what the heart does, is it constantly beats and keeps the door open. It'd be interesting to get some more detail, in any direction. I would love to be proven wrong about this, because that would mean that we got some information on this subject. I'd also like to be proven right on this. So, yeah, the heart is a very fascinating object. We know that it was built by Albrecht and maintained by Vilcor and Tradi. But it basically never gets mentioned. All this stuff, Albrecht is very popular in the lore, the recent story beats are sort of involving him. And yet we don't hear anything about the heart. So that is a shame. You can see the trapezoidal portal in Albrecht's notes too. Yes, the portal that Albrecht stepped through when he first went to the void was also trapezoidal. He describes it as such in his in the story, and you can also see pictures of it. And I think the lore about Deimos is kind of weird. It's not insurmountably weird. There's ways in which you can make it work, but there's little bits that sound like they disagree with each other. I initially didn't think that Albrecht's laboratories were on Deimos, and then obviously I was wrong about that because Whispers in the Walls came out, and we found out that like all of his labs were on Deimos. But there's like dialogue between the Entrati that are like, how are we doing on time? Okay, I think we're good. So it like, you know, I cataloged all the dialogue for the Entrati, and they say a lot of stuff that like has some implications. One of them being that like they didn't used to be here. Like the Entrati family say things about, well, it's mostly just it's either son or one of the kids says that like they essentially moved to Deimos. They were somewhere else and they moved, and Kaylee wasn't supposed to come. The daughter was not supposed to move with them, and she like stowed away anyway, and she came along. That's what Sun says, and you know, so that's why I thought that Albrecht wasn't initially on Deimos. But yeah, because he was, I guess we're just you know, based on the more up to date lore, it is possible and maybe even likely that the Wall of Loke is in fact Albrecht's original door. Although, I mean, he closed it immediately afterwards, and one can imagine he was very hesitant to open it again, based on his traumatic first experience. So the Wall of Loke that the heart keeps open may or may not be the same as his original portal, but his original portal was also trapezoidal in shape. So, could be, could not be. There are a lot of issues with art, yeah. I think the biggest issue with my theory, so it's still unclear, you know, if you do subscribe to that theory, it's still a little bit unclear as to, like, the Warframes, they're Void empowered. A lot of their stuff has to do with the Void, even though they're mostly infestation. But they're like Void empowered. And then the Tenno themselves, like the Tenno operators, are they also subject to the same restrictions? Like, because that doesn't really get tested during the quest when the heart shuts down. Like, you don't know if your operator can pop out and, like, you know, be shooting their Void beam. Like, you could be like, yes, they are separate Void constructs, and they can exist independently of the heart, or maybe not. It literally just doesn't get brought up, and now it never will, because they set Heart of Deimos into the storyline, so you have to do it before War Within. It used to be you could do it at any point, and so there'd be like different dialogue lines, whether based on if you'd unlocked your operator or not, and now there aren't, because you always have to do it before unlocking your operator. So it's sort of a moot point of that, in a sense. But like, so we don't know if the Tenno are also if they also require the heart in order to function or not. You know, it could go either way. But the biggest problem with like my theory of the heart is like Deimos was in the Void for the longest period of time, and yet all the Void technology worked. Like the solar rails appear to kind of been functioning, you know, it's like in bits and pieces, the network. But like the solar rail, various other Void technology has essentially been functioning since the fall of the Oregon, and yet Deimos was in the Void for most of that period of time and only recently came out. And how can the portal be allowing Void energy into the universe, into the physical universe, if both sides of the portal are in the Void? And the only explanation I could do to solve that is that the Wall of Loke is some sort of metaphysical thing, and so even if it is located in the Void, it still serves a purpose of being a bridge in between the Void and real space. But I mean, that's super hand wavy and it doesn't make sense. But again, this is that point aside, this is still the only theory that makes sense to me. The art comes out of nowhere and goes back to nowhere. I mean, yeah, in terms of story importance and like narrative importance, that's also, I think, like this. There was like a lot of I don't want to say backlash, but there was like a lot of discussion at the time when Heart of Deimos was released, because, you know, they're like, oh, this is an incredibly important device that is like vital and central in terms of importance to everything, and we didn't mention it until just now. Like, no one's ever brought it up until just now, and then once you've solved the problem, no one ever brings it up ever again. Even during the New War, like, I saw lots of discussion when the New War came out, because they were like, why didn't Ballast go for the heart? Or, you know, there was no discussion at all. Later during Veilbreaker, Kaylee says that the Entrati were like, we have to protect the heart. It doesn't really mention... it doesn't really mention how they did that. Maybe they even just pulled Deimos back into the void. I think it shows up on the star chart during the New War, but I mean, that doesn't really mean much. It's super important lore-wise. Like, we are told that. And yet we're not shown that in terms of how the story treats it elsewhere. I kind of thought the grandmother was just lying, since she implies that she orchestrated the heart issue. Yeah, so the implication of the Heart of Deimos quest is the heart is failing, and everyone's like, hey guys, this is super important, it needs to get fixed, and it does fail. Like a necromech comes by and like finishes it off and like shoots it and destroys it, and then and so all the void stuff is broken, and then you fix it again shortly afterwards. So there's only like a brief period of time in which the heart was broken. And then at the end, grandmother is like, implies that she was controlling the necromech, and she orchestrated the whole situation so that the rest of the Entrada family would work together to fix it, and that would help them solve their problems. And, you know, she's ultimately right about that, because that brings you, the Tenno character, the player character, into the story, and you help them, you know, solve their family issues, and you work with them, and they... Yeah, so like, that, I guess, was her plan, and it appears to have been successful, but obviously very stupid and risky, and, like, you know, whatever. But she's not... I mean, she's, like, not present for basically the whole quest, and only shows up at the end. And so everyone else is telling you that the heart is super important. So it's not really a function... It's not really, like, grandmother lying. It's, like, everyone is like, hey, guys, this is super important. The heart that powers the Tenno is also synonymous with the Zariman children. Yeah, we just don't know what the interplay is in terms of, like, void energy, the Tenno, the heart. You know, what depends on what. In Hun Hao's dialogue, he uses the same language when they're talking about the Heart of Deimos. He does say heart in the second dream. He says, expose their heart and cleave it beating from its nest. You know, and, like, yeah, I don't think he's talking about the Heart of Deimos, obviously, because that didn't exist in the story at the time. I mean, yeah, I don't know that I would draw really any parallel there. You know, it's hard to be like, oh, this is a metaphor, when, like, literally everything is a metaphor in this game. So, but, I mean, yeah, I would say that basically we just don't know, in terms of how the heart is related to the Tenno. But yeah, that is mostly everything that I had to say about the heart. So this is another interesting page. I guess this is either supposed to be the Necroloid room or just some random... Entrati like area. It doesn't really resemble anything that we've seen. In the middle, so you've got like a person here. I don't even think this is a Warframe. I think this is like a drifter or something, or like a person. In the middle, this platform, which looks like stone, but is actually, I think, metal, because it's got like the medallions or obols, like Entrati stuff tends to have. So I think this is like a metal platform. But you've got like the corn cob of a necromech. So maybe it's being assembled, or maybe that's what Lloyd was supposed to look like. He was just supposed to be a corn cob. I don't know, because it's not. There's no details on it. It's just a floating corn cob. The core of the necromech. But this room with like the platforms going towards it and like hanging over this like sort of abyss. It's very interesting. It looks more like, the part of the Entrati Labs that came like later with Whispers in the Walls. It looks more like that, and even like the murmur parts of it, where it's like made of stone and concrete and like void. But yeah, this top part doesn't really look like much of what we've seen before. So that's interesting. And then down on the bottom picture, this is just like we're back outside of the Campaign Drift. No Entrati stuff to be seen here. But yeah, this is just the alien landscape of the Campaign Drift with like tendrils and like stalks, like fungus, like just stalks poking up. You get a 10 for scale here. And the one thing that's interesting here is you've got these pools of like liquid, and these actually resemble hot springs. Like the geothermal hot springs you would see in Yellowstone specifically. Like hot springs are like a general geothermal phenomenon, but the ones in Yellowstone specifically have these like populations of bacteria, and there's like multiple of them, and they all thrive at different temperature levels, and so you produce these multicolored pools where the ones on the bacteria on the outer layers of the rim of the pool, the water is not as hot there, and so like you've got like red and yellow bacteria there, and then as the pool goes deeper and like into the center, it becomes a lot hotter, and so the only ones that can survive there are like blue and blue and like green. But yeah, because you have this temperature gradient and different populations of bacteria that can live there, you get these multicolored hot springs, and so that's like the real world explanation. And it's a very distinct look, and so it's interesting to see that like popped in there. Maybe that's like an infested thing. Deimos doesn't have any volcanic activity. It's just like an asteroid, basically. Hey, Phenomenon. But yeah, you got just an infested landscape with like the hot springs here, and like I don't know what that was really supposed to imply. I think it's supposed to just look cool, really. We got some more stuff here. Let me just flip ahead a couple of pages. Yeah, so we're like in that part where we got some nice like landscape shots to look at. So yeah, just like a nice landscape shot. This one, yeah. So this one is actually a shot of the. Oh, okay. So this is what the Necrolisk does look like. Again, it's like you've got this giant. It's encased in like a giant growth of some kind. Here you can actually see the shape, like through the translucent parts of the growth. Where were we originally looking at this? Where was this? It was like just earlier. Oh, it was the cover image, of course. But yeah, you've got the shape of the necrolisc with like basically like the tall door, and you can actually still see that same shape through here. I know that there are translucent parts of the necrolisc like growth thingy, and you can look through them. But I think what you do is you just look into this area, and you don't see this like tower structure like you can in this concept image. And then this page, like I said, this is just the inside part of like the loading screen, or not. This is the door to the loading screen. So this is basically like the front door of like the necrolisc structure, and that's inside of like the growth that's covering it. I wonder if that was their early concept of the exocrine. Do you mean like the hot springs? Because I mean, yeah, like that could be. And so here you've got these three pictures are all like the tall door. This is like where it's like the most intact, like the tall door that leads into the necrolisc. And then in these two, it's sort of like exposed, broken down, grown over. You know, there's not much there. I wonder if these are supposed to be like other versions of the necrolisc, like other similar facilities that were like taken over. We know from like their dialogue during the bounties that it's not just the necrolisc. There used to be like buildings and facilities all over the Cambion Drift and all over Deimos, and some of the bounties are about reclaiming those from the infestation. Not that there's any in-game like representation of that. You know, nothing ever changes. I mean, and I would love, I would like more detail about like what goes on in those other installations. What does that help with? What does that do? But yeah, so you've got like different versions of like the tall door, and they're like, you know, more broken down and exposed, as opposed to the tall door that we are familiar with, which is like leading into the necrolisc, which is still like, you know, overgrown and infested, but not like destroyed. Yeah, the hot springs. I never considered that part of the necrolisc that has all the blue flora is between the actual necrolisc and the outer shell. Yeah, this is like the in-between part. Yeah. I don't know why the necrolisc has this giant growth over it. Like, is that like an attack by the infestation? Or is that something that like the Entrati engineered to prevent the infestation from like worming its way inside? Which like it does, right? Like there's infestation growth inside the necrolisc, right? I'm trying to like reconstruct it from memory as it appears in game. So again, here you've got like sort of the outer platform leading into the necrolisc. The one thing of note, by the way, is that there's actually an Entrati here. I don't know how easy it is to see, but there's like, you know, there's like an half-infested Orican sort of like popping up out of the ground here, grabbing their head. There's a necromech holding the hole open. You're right about that. I don't think it shows up here, but you are right about how that works in the game. So it must be an attack. It doesn't seem engineered. Yeah, you're right. So I guess just ignore my ramblings on that. Yeah. I mean, this is also one of the things that you first notice when you start playing the Heart of Deimos and you're like approaching the necklace for the first time. The hole that lets you enter into the growth, there's like one single opening, and it's being held open by two dead necromechs. Like one on, they're like bracing it, they're like holding it up, and then they just sort of like left that way. So yeah, so it must not be. You're right. It must not be planned. It must be like an encroachment by the infestation that they're like holding back. So yeah, you've got, you know, just like a nice overgrown Entrati place here. You've got like the marble and gold arches and stuff like that, but it's all been overgrown. Person here for scale. You've got a nice tower-looking structure here with like statues and stuff, but now there's just green goo pouring out of it. Got some landscape shots here with Excalibur for scale here. This one I don't think has a scale person, but you can tell. The thing that is visible in this image that I don't think is visible in any of the other ones that we've seen so far is just like the scale of the infestation on Deimos, because you have these giant tendrils just reaching out into space like from the moon's surface. And if you're on the Kamini Drift and you like look up, you can see them in the skybox, the tentacles, the tendrils, and they and that means that they're like hundreds, thousands of kilometers long. Like they're like part of the like they're like on the same order of magnitude as like the whole moon. And of course, if you zoom out and like look at it from the star chart, you see like the shape that Deimos has, the weird skull shape because of the infestation. Like the whole planet has been completely consumed and like turned into infestation. And so and this is the only image I think that we've seen so far that illustrates that, but in a way you've got the tendrils here just reaching out into space. Like it's not like a rock that has like got some infestation growing on the surface. It's like completely different. I feel like there's some spooky background music for those spooky images. Is the music like not super audible? Let me turn it up a bit. And let me make sure that it is. Yeah, it should be outputting. Okay, you can now. Yeah, I don't want it to be like too loud that it's like competing with my voice, obviously. But yeah, I turned it up a bit, and let me know if that, how that works. Deimos canonically has a different strain of infestation that makes things grow bigger. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it does. The gray strain is what it's called of the infestation is present on Deimos. And yeah, it makes things grow bigger, and so you basically get these big planet-sized or moon-sized, fragments of the... Oh. This is interesting. I have not seen this image before. So this is like an internal chamber, of course. I think this must be... This seems like it is like Lloyd's chamber, and so this floating corncob must be an early version of Lloyd. To be fair, the derelict tendrils are also pretty long. I guess that is true. But like the derelicts are ships, and Deimos is like a moon. It's a small moon, but still, it's like in terms of like magnitude, it's like a completely different scale. But I mean, you're right. We know that the infested tendrils are, able to reach, kilometers long, and so it's just like more of that. My wife wants to know where we're all talking about tentacles and tendrils. I think you should not tell her that. But yeah, so this, I mean, I think what this is supposed to be is a like Lloyd's chamber where you go buy the necromech parts and stuff like that. And so this corncob thing must be Lloyd. It's interesting to know that was the original concept, especially given that we also see the concept of the necromech here, and the corncob is the core of the necromech as is in the game. It's not hentai unless you're a Nidus main. Well, where does Nidus come from? So maybe that means that the Necroloid was like supposed to be part of a necromech, or like maybe an ex-necromech or something like that. it is interesting. And of course, now we know that Lloyd has a whole completely different origin that gets, which is also cool. But it does make you think about what their original intentions were for Lloyd. And this room is interesting, but not as interesting as the room we ultimately got, I think. But it would have been nice to see this somewhere else, maybe. Largely not infested, although there's definitely, it's definitely breaking out over here. But for the most part, this room seems to be clean. And then here you've got another inner space with like a scary... This is a face, right? This is like a giant face. It might be an Entrati who's like got fused into the wall. I don't think I'm like seeing things here. But yeah, this just looks like an internal space that's just been like pretty overgrown. Can't stay. All right. Well, thanks for stopping by, and I think we're not gonna. We're almost done, honestly, with this section, and so not much more to go on the stream. But thanks for stopping by. Okay, so here we've got these are the last pages, by the way. The next section is on the next page. So these are the last two images for this section. So this one, like the other one that I was talking about, it gives you the sense of the scale. You've got a person here, but then you've got tendrils reaching up into space, into outer space, basically. Which is just crazy to think about. Going back to like the Tyrannid, mentioned there earlier, it continues to play into that association, and I think because that's what Tyrannids from Warhammer 40k do, is once they've finished absorbing all the biomass, they construct these giant capillary tendrils to carry all the biomass off of the planet into the ships in space, so they can carry the biomass to the next planet, and they basically extract everything, take it up into space, but they have to build these giant capillary tendrils from the surface that reach all the way into space. And obviously that's not functionally, that's not what the tendrils are doing, but the image is there, and so that's what it's sort of reminding me of, is you just got these giant tendrils reaching out into space, and who knows what the long-term plans of the infestation of the Grey Strain on Deimos is supposed to be, because Deimos was confined in the void for the longest time. We can assume basically since the fall of the Empire to up until the present day, when it comes out during the Heart of Deimos quest. And so while it was in the void, it couldn't really spread because it's not in real space. There's nowhere for it to go. And there's a little bit of a hint that the void is scared of, or that the infestation is avoids the, well, I don't want to, it is doesn't like the void, or that might be specific to the Man in the Wall. Because we only get a little bit of hint of this from the Nightwave conversation. And so that would also probably hamper its ability to spread while it was in the void. I feel like I've been catfished. But now that Deimos is out of the void, it's back in real space. Other people can run into it, and they do. You've got the Grineer and the Corpus, various teams that are stranded there. And so, what are the plans, to the extent the infestation has plans, that, now that Deimos is back in real space and, could, in theory, infect other entire planets, is that a storyline that we're going to go down at some point later? it is hard, I think, for to make a storyline that revolves around the infestation, and because it's very one dimensional. It's like grow, consume, assimilate, and so the options are like it tries to grow and you stop it. Like that's how all the stories have to go about it, right? Which I think makes it it's like a little hard to write for, and I think that problem plagues any sort of franchise that has a infestation like faction, like the Zerg in StarCraft or the Tyranids in Warhammer. The Borg, yeah, Danny, mentioning the Borg from Star Trek. It's like it's one dimensional. It's like a one dimensional faction, and so that makes the stories a little less. It makes the stories by necessity one dimensional. The Flood from Halo, yes, and there's ways around it. I think the Zerg from StarCraft are able to buck the trend a little bit because, primarily because they put like intelligences in charge. Like there's like the Overmind and the Queen of Blades, and so it becomes less about assimilating and it has like more goals. And we know that the infestation in Warframe has a hive mind, but we've never like really encountered it or talked to it or heard about other people who have talked to it. Like it's not really like a character. We just know it has a hive mind, collective intelligence. That has been canonically established in a couple of ways. But we still have not seen many of the implications of that other than the Emissary Nightwave series, which was started and then resolved, so there's nowhere else for it to go there. The infestation has a lot of cleverness, though, like the whole thing with Arlo, yeah, the emissary that I just mentioned, and it's smart enough to realize when we're setting traps. Yeah, I mean, every now and then there's like some dialogue where you're like, oh, you're dealing with the infestation, and it's like smart enough to respond to you. Like, infested rescue missions, the Lotus is like, oh, the infestation is smart, it's responding, it intentionally trapped the operative, and now it's responding to you trying to get him out. So, like, there's, like, definitely an intelligence there, but it's not, like, presented as a character. It's almost presented as, like, just a force, We hear some of the hive mind from Forward and Jordis. I mean, yeah, Forward and Jordis, they talk. And so do, like, the Zealoid Prelate, But, I don't think that you would say that's like they're speaking directly from the hive mind. I mean sometimes you have it could be, but I don't I think the infestation also has like characters, so like Ford is just like an intelligent infested, and so that's why he's talking. He's not talking because he's just like the mouth of the hive mind. But I mean that's just my thoughts. We literally have no clue one way or the other. So he definitely, could be speaking as the hive mind, but, I mean, I just personally don't think so. And, Jordis is even trickier, because Jordis was, who knows what Forward is or was. I mean, he's presented as, a giant charger. But Jordis was a Cephalon, and, so has, a complete independent personality, and was a person at one point, and so he gets infested and corrupted and twisted, and he's starts to say things in a more infested way, but it seems to me that and there's another personality there, which might be the hive mind. It does seem like there's another consciousness that is fighting with him. And that might be just a fragment of Jordis's mind, that is corrupted, or it might be the hive mind directly. And if that's the case, then I would say that that's the only time we've ever heard the hive mind talk, is when it's talking through Jordis, which it only does sometimes. But yeah, I'll have to review some of like the Jordas verdict. I want to like the trial. I want to type that up for the Oregon Archives at some point, even though it's removed from the game. Just to have that like as a historical resource and to see the dialogue from that. And I don't remember off the top of my head if there's anything specific there that deals with this subject from Jordas's lines during the Jordas verdict. And then the last page, by the way, just to close out the section, is more infested landscape. You've got a Excalibur for scale here, just very tiny in the center of the image, and just surrounded by just the twisted alien landscape. This is a very complex image, by the way. There's just like, it's just a landscape, but there's, you know, all this infestation everywhere in its different forms. But yeah, that was the Necrolisk section. And so now we're done with like the faction sections. So now we've got 3 more. We've got the New War, Angels of the Zeraman, and the Duviri Paradox as like story-focused chapters. And I'm excited for that, for these two. And these also look like they're long chapters. Wait, what the heck? What is this doing in the New War section? This is the Infested Necromech thingy. Anyway, that doesn't make too much sense. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of overlap in the New War section and like the Sentient section. So, but I think these are like, you know, bulkier. Some of the in terms of page length, you know, the Ostron, Cetus, Fortuna, Necrolisk sections were kind of shorter, but there's a lot more depth with these like story-focused ones. So I'm looking forward to it. When was the art book released? If I'm remembering correctly, it was a year ago. It was released at TennoCon, and it was either 1 year ago or 2 years ago. I think it was last year because it has a whole section in Duviri, and that was released, March of 23, right? And so if this came out in the summer of 23, that would make sense. Because it's not going to have all this Duviri stuff before Duviri comes out. So I think it was released at TennoCon 2023. And then it sold out instantly, and then they brought it back, and they sold it again for TennoCon 2024, and that's when I picked this one up. And it's the same one. They didn't like add new stuff for Whispers in the Wall, which would have been nice. I would have loved a section on that, but I guess we have to wait 10 more years for them to make the Volume 2 art book before we can see the Whispers in the Walls content. But yeah, so the you know, when it has like these forwards and you know, descriptions from the people who were working on this at the time, it's like, you know, a lot of these people have actually moved on to Soulframe, and so they're not primarily working on Warframe anymore. Even though that, you know, they have said that everyone who, like, it's not like people who are working on Soulframe are never working on Warframe, you know, because it's the same company. There's a ton of overlap, but you know, they have different like principal roles penciled out. Anyway, but yeah, that's that for this week. So okay, I should have said this earlier, but I'm going the next couple of weeks. We're not having streams because I will be on like a business trip, and then my schedule is, this is just going to be a busy few months. I do want to continue like the streams regularly, but the time frame might move around, and So yeah, just keep an eye on the Discord server, because that's where I'll be making any announcement about the stream. But for sure, there's not going to be one for the next 2 weeks, just because I will be like physically somewhere else. So yeah. So unfortunately, there's going to be a short hiatus in terms of the art book streams before we start with the new war and moving forward on that. And then when we do start it again, it might be in different time slots, and we'll just have to see. But I will return at some point, and so you can look forward to that. But yeah, for now, so long, and we'll see you in the future.